salinity at a cellular level. Now, if the body's pH becomes overly acidic or alkaline, then cells become poisoned by their own waste and die. So it is said that an overly acidic body is a cause of a host of health problems and degenerative diseases. Now, in general, the diet involves eating certain fresh citrus and other low-sugar fruits, vegetables, tubers, nuts, and legumes. And it involves avoiding grains, dairy, meat, sugar, alcohol, caffeine, and fungi. Now, some arguments for the acid-alkali diet, or the alkaline diet, involves eliminating a lot of poor quality foods. That's only going to have a positive impact, and many of the practices adopted in such a diet will also raise the quality of the foods consumed. So they're two very good points or benefits of alkaline diet. Now, there are certainly a lot of question marks against them too, and arguments against it. So there are certainly question marks as to whether the pH of the ash of the food is really that important. Certainly in determining the overall alkalizing or acidifying effects of the food. There's certainly evidence that other systems or areas of the body can have a much more powerful effect on the body's pH. There is also evidence that any given food can have both an alkaline or acidifying effect on the body, and that depends upon the area of the area or system of the body that you're talking about. The diet can also assumes that everyone is overly acidic, and again there is also evidence that some people are actually overly alkaline. So whilst many of the acidic foods make sense, or eliminating many of the acidic foods makes sense, the elimination of meat does not make that much sense, given its place in the diet, or the place it's had in the diet throughout human evolution. So there is a lack of logic, at least from my perspective as I understand it, with the alkaline diet, and a lot of limitations with it. Next, we will move on to the food combining diet. Now, food combining suggests that we should only consume certain foods or nutrients in certain combinations at certain times. It is based on the idea that we cannot effectively digest certain foods or nutrients when they are mixed together. For example, the enzyme for breaking down carbohydrates, amylase, has an alkaline effect, whilst the enzyme for breaking down protein, pepsin, has an acidifying effect, and thus they will neutralize each other, resulting in undigested foods. The main rules behind food combining are to avoid eating protein and fat together, only eating fruit by itself and waiting 20 to 30 minutes before consuming any other food. Non-starchy or mildly starchy vegetables should only be eaten with starchy carbohydrates or proteins. Starchy carbohydrates, by that we're really referring to things like grains and potatoes, those types of foods. Starchy carbohydrates should only be eaten with fats or non-starchy or mildly starchy vegetables, and protein should only be eaten with non-starchy or mildly starchy vegetables. So the argument for food combining is that it can help, or at least claims to aid the breakdown or absorption of nutrients, and that it can also alleviate digestive complaints such as flatulence and bloating. So, however, some of the arguments against food combining is that some areas of it don't really make any logical sense, such as keeping fats and proteins separate, when in general they occur in nature together. So, particularly with things like nuts and meat and certain fish and poultry. How do you keep the fat separate from the meat in those instances? From the protein. So, whilst food combining may well help reduce digestive complaints, perhaps a better approach would be to improve the digestive function anyway, which I believe is the main cause of digestive problems, rather than necessarily anything to do with poorly combining your foods. I'd certainly discuss this area in much more detail in my slideshow, when and why raw food diets do and don't work, which I recommend you read if you wish to understand my reasons for saying this. I also cover this area in my free teleconference, what foods and diets will work best for you. So please check out those resources if you wish to know a bit more. Eating fruit by itself can also cause blood sugar problems for some people. So there is certainly question marks around this idea, and if it was a fundamental principle of good nutrition and digestion, then why don't a great deal more people that do not food combine experience digestive issues? The next area I'm going to look at is vegetarianism. So vegetarianism, quite simple really, it involves not eating animal meat. And some types of vegetarians will avoid dairy, some will avoid eggs, some will avoid fish, or some will avoid them all. Arguments for vegetarianism is that animal products can cause a lot of health problems, that vegetarianism is better for the environment, and it causes no harm to animals, and also some people are vegetarian for religious reasons. Also, some statistics show that vegetarians are actually healthier than meat eaters, which obviously on face value tends to suggest that vegetarianism is actually healthier. So the arguments against vegetarianism include a higher risk of nutritional deficiencies. Certainly this is a major risk factor for vegetarians, particularly those that pay little attention to such risks. Most common problems will be a vitamin B12 deficiency, vitamin A deficiency, and iron deficiencies. Vitamin B12 is only found in animal products, as is vitamin A. However, beta-carotene, which can be converted to vitamin A, is found in plants. Now, there are doubts as to how effective beta-carotene is actually converted into vitamin A. So, research shows that some people lack sufficient quantities of the enzyme required for this conversion, so for it to be of any real benefit, and will therefore tend to develop these deficiencies. And the other problem with it is, even if you find that someone has these high levels of this enzyme, you actually need to eat an awful lot of foods that contain beta-carotene in order to support your vitamin A requirements. Also, whilst iron can actually be sourced from plant sources, it's not necessarily of the same type or the same quality as that found in animal sources of iron. Plant sources contain non-heme-based iron, whilst animals contain heme-based iron. And the two are very different, and there are question marks as to whether non-heme iron is an adequate alternative to support good health. Another argument against vegetarianism, more of an argument against the claim that it's healthier, or the proof that it's healthier, i.e. things like lower heart disease,